Okay, in theory, I am live now. I'm just checking with the people watching the group. By the way, if you're watching this recorded on YouTube, I am presenting to a remote group, and I am waiting to ensure that they can hear me properly and all that. So the first few minutes of this recording may be me just waiting to make sure that things are in sync. If so, you can just fast forward a bit to get to the fun stuff. You won't be looking at my face the entire time. I know it's really bright, but that will go away. Sweet. And I just heard from the group that they can hear me. And let me just confirm that they're okay for me starting. And just a few more seconds, I think, and we'll be ready to go. By the way, I'm looking at a Surface 3 over here. That's why I keep going back and forth. All right, so they gave me the heads up. All right, so first off, hi, I'm Raymond Camden, and I'll be switching the slides. You won't be seeing my ginormous head a lot. But I just want to say a quick thank you to Daniel Fredericks and his user group for having me out, I guess, virtually, remote. I definitely appreciate it. I also changed the date on them like 3 or 4 days ago, so my apologies, and thank you for being understanding on that. So with that out of the way, let's get rid of my head, and I'm going to start sharing my screen. Oh, and one more bit of metadata. So this Hangout definitely has a question type pod. I'm not sure where it is for you as the viewer. For me, it will create a queue of questions that I will not see until I am done. So if you ask a question and I don't answer it right away, that's because I'll be waiting until the very end. And if you ask a question, if I don't get to it, or if you can't even find how to ask a question, that's fine. I'll have contact information in the slide deck. So you can reach out to me and definitely ask me any question you have. All right, so with that, I will start sharing my screen. Share. Okay, so Daniel, if you could just real quick give me a heads up that you are seeing my slide deck. And I know that the live people are about 30 seconds behind me, so I'm just going to wait 22 more seconds or so to see what they see. And cool. All right, they see. All right. So that should be the end of the odd pauses and stuff like that. So welcome to Browser Tools for Debugging and Profit. To be honest, there won't really be a lot of profit involved in this. So my name is Raymond Camden, and I didn't put that on the slide, which is a bit silly. But I put a picture of me holding a lightsaber, which is far more important. I am a developer evangelist for IBM, and most recently for a product called StrongLoop. And I'm not talking about that tonight. I am going to be doing some videos pretty soon on StrongLoop and Loopback. And if you read my blog, then you know that I've already been talking about it. I also do Node.js stuff, and I just like the web in general. I like HTML, I like JavaScript, I even like CSS a tiny bit. I tweet on Twitter at Raymond Camden. Please follow me. I only tweet important stuff, definitely no Star Wars stuff. And I am blogging at raymondcamden.com. You can find my articles there. You can find old stuff, new stuff, etc. Definitely subscribe there, and you will be notified whenever I post something new and interesting, or at least new. So what this whole presentation about is essentially, what to do when things aren't working. Because as a developer, that's probably 90% of our life are things not working. In fact, my first programming experience back on a Apple IIe back in 79 or 80 or so was me spending 2 or 3 hours on my very first program with it not working. I remember when it actually worked because it felt really good and I got addicted to programming. So we definitely have a problem, and it's not necessarily the bugs, because we're always going to have bugs. It's kind of a bit off screen here, and I apologize for that. But yeah, that makes it a bit better. But if you had a comp sci class in college, you probably saw this picture before. This was the first quote unquote computer bug. It was a literal bug in the hardware, and they've been around for a very, very long time, and they're not really going anywhere. The problem really is actually finding the bug and, you know, being able to figure out what it was. And one of the issues with modern web development today is we have so many darn things going on. We have multiple JavaScript files. We have JavaScript files that are minified. We have HTML files. And if you're working with like an AngularJS app, you can actually have multiple different HTML files, not just the one that you initially load. There's a heck of a lot there, and it can be really hard to like find out what's going on. And by the way, if you're watching the recording, let me know if you actually pause here so you can keep looking for Waldo. So I just want to give you an example, and I'm going to use jQuery UI, which is actually a library I haven't used in a long time. It was a very nice one, but it's just not something that I've used for a while. But it's a great way to add simple UI widgets, and its API is actually rather simple. But you take something like autocomplete, and that's the feature where you start typing and you get a drop down of suggestions. And by the way, there's native HTML support for that now in modern browsers. But something as simple as an autocomplete, what do you need in order for that to work successfully? Well, you need JavaScript enabled. And you may think, well, everyone has JavaScript enabled. Well, until those files are actually downloaded, you don't have it. Until the DOM actually gets around to, you know, executing that script tag, it's almost as if you don't have it enabled. And then jQuery has to load. Now, why would that not load? Well, a common mistake that I've made many times is to try to work on the jQuery CDN when I'm on an airplane. Yes, I have made that mistake before. jQuery UI has to load as well. So for that, even if you don't use a CDN, jQuery UI has some like really funky file names. So it's like jQuery UI.2.9.pound.8._.js. I always have trouble getting the exact right file name for it. And the same thing applies for its CSS, and it uses the CSS to render its UI stuff. So that has to be loaded correctly as well. Next, and this is a jQuery UI particularity type thing, you have to tell it what DOM item that you want to create an autocomplete. If you screw that up, which you could typo the ID name, you can mess up the selector, that would be broken as well. You then have to ensure that you use the correct setup option. So again, jQuery UI is rather simple, but this is one more place that you could screw things up. Next, if you're using a remote data source to populate that dropdown, there's a whole heck of a lot of things that can go wrong there as well. If you're talking to a ColdFusion server or a Node.js server, it could be down, it could be broken, it could be buggy, it could be outputting information, the wrong way. There's multiple things in that area alone, and that one bullet point where things can go wrong. So essentially, what it comes down to is that you have so many darn places for things to break, a whole heck of a lot of them. And to make matters worse is that the first bug is probably one that you're not even aware of. So, we're all used to the scenario where the client says, hey, I hit this button and it didn't work. And so that's like a known thing. The button is not working. But you may have a whole suite of things that are going wrong that you have no idea about. So random example, this is CNN.com webpage. It looks totally normal, but there's actually some bugs here. There's some things that are going wrong. You don't know this because browsers kind of take a what me worry approach to things. It hides all of these errors from the end user. Reason for this is that HTML and JavaScript has been pretty darn messy since day one. So browsers have been built since day one to assume it's getting crap and to deal with that crap as best as it can. And also, for most of the people using the web, they're non-technical, they're not programmers, they don't want to see a stack trace when they're looking at CNN. So how do you know then as a developer that something has gone wrong? It would be nice if the browser was really like, kind of in your face, like, hey, there's something really going on wrong here. There's a couple of ways that you can do it. Number one is to use some of the tools that we're going to talk about, and actually later I'm talking about like right now. And then obviously if you do any testing, and I assume that everyone is doing testing, I shouldn't have to even recommend this, but certainly testing before you send stuff out would ensure that at least most of the known bugs won't be there. So one kind of cool thing that you can look at are Chrome extensions. Now, I will say that for a lot of this presentation, I'll be focused on Chrome. But you will hear me say again and again that this is not something that you need Chrome to do or that you should only do in Chrome. So for Chrome, there's actually a pretty cool little extension that you could add called the JavaScript Errors Notifier. And what this will do is actually flag in the UI, and a bit different from the screenshot. That's the screenshot from the extension webpage, but it will actually flag that something has gone wrong. And that'll make it a bit more obvious while you're browsing that you should use DevTools, and that's the next section, to start digging into what's going wrong. So what I'm going to do is open up a quick demo where I have some broken code. And if you can see up here are my current extensions. I have a bunch of them here. And you're going to see one of them is going to act up. And right there, that little red icon is telling me that something has gone wrong. And if I click on it, I get an error. And I say, oh, reference Y is not defined. And if I were to go to CNN, I would see these as well. Now, many times they're harmless errors, but again, the idea is that I use extensions like this to make it really freaking obvious to me that, hey, something is going wrong. And part of the reason for that, in DevTools, obviously this error will show up, and you'll see an example of that in a few minutes. But when I'm on my laptop, I tend to not keep DevTools open all the time because it takes a sizable chunk of my screen real estate. So because I'll have it minimized, having this little reference show up like this is really nice. I'll point out a bit later, I'll be showing an example in Firefox, and this type of feature is actually built in, and you'll see how. Excuse me. So a related tool to this, kind of, more background looking at errors, you can actually sign up for a service where as people browse your website and errors occur in JavaScript, they will be reported. So an example of one of these is Errorception. Has a 30-day trial and has a cheap plan that begins at $5. And obviously they have plans that scale up based on your traffic and your needs. It works via a simple embed. Once you have it and you let it run, you can then log on to their dashboard and see all kinds of errors. And you see them broken down by browser. You could see a nice little, I think they're called spark charts or spark lines, where you could see a change in occurrence. So if you see a big spike, for example, then you know that something in particular is going wrong. And I love that at most naked error there. That's kind of cool. So just, again, more random examples. And this is an older screenshot. You can see this is back when my blog was still ColdFusion, and it's not anymore. But again, you can see nice breakdowns, and again, one more chart. So this is a pretty cool service. I've used it in the past. There are other ones out there. So Track.js, which is pretty cool. I think the price is a bit higher. I found their dashboard to be a bit nicer. And New Relic actually has a similar service as well. And I'll give a special shout out to New Relic. They also have some really good server side monitoring stuff as well. I was really kind of like blown away by, they're like full stack monitoring of stuff. and some really good free trials and free tiers as well. If you want to learn more about these types of service, I have a link here in the slide deck, and Daniel, and on the Daniel, I'll definitely share the link with you. And when this is posted on YouTube, I'll edit the description to link to the slide deck so you can get it, and then click these links to go visit this article. So now that you know that you have a bug, how do you begin working to actually fix it? So this is where you begin to learn about your browser tools. Now, one thing I want to point out is that it doesn't matter if you are using the browser tools in your standard browser. In fact, you want to use more than one DevTools. And I cannot stress this enough. I think Chrome gets the most attention, and that's fair. I think they really push DevTools the farthest, quickest. But the other browsers have some extremely compelling DevTools, especially Firefox. I'm a Chrome user, but about once a year I switch to Firefox for a couple months, and I'm just really kind of just impressed by what Firefox is doing. And I'll give a real example of this. I was working on App Cache, and this was about 2 years or so ago, and I was just playing with App Cache just to test out the feature. And if you know anything at all about App Cache, it's not the friendliest of APIs. I was working in Chrome and doing a simple demo, and it wasn't working, and I didn't know why. And for some reason, I said, okay, I'll just fire up Firefox. And for whatever reason, Firefox simply reported errors that Chrome was not. Chrome wasn't, Chrome was encountering an error, but it wasn't exposing it to me. Whereas in Firefox, I saw the error immediately, and like literally 1 minute after opening Firefox and running my demo, I saw the issue and I had it fixed. And that just kind of blew me away. So now every time I'm hitting something that is very gnarly, I will open up Firefox, I will open up Safari. I have a Windows machine to my side. I'll even check IE and Edge. Their dev tools are pretty impressive as well. So for Chrome in particular, the way you open it is you go to the wrench, and actually that should be the hamburger menu. They changed that sometime recently, but you're seeing me do it now. Go to Tools and then Developer Tools. And there is a keyboard combo for that. Let me actually do this over here so I don't mess up my presentation. One thing I'll point out is that you can actually move the console from the bottom to the right. That just seems weird, but if you want to do that, you can. And you can also detach it. So if you have like, a giant 30-inch monitor, you can actually separate out the dev tools and move it someplace else. And if I remember right, and they keep changing the UI, there we go. Yeah, you can just click right there. And there's settings here for things you could tweak. I typically don't do a lot of tweaking in here. I will point out a couple of them. And the most important one, at least in my opinion, and I should stress, everything that I'm showing y'all today in terms of, what dev tools I use the most, these are things that have been very useful for my development. Definitely you may find other tools to be more helpful, more useful, etc. But again, I'm just kind of focusing on what's been most practical for me. All right, so with that being said, preserve log upon navigation. I'm going to be talking about the console in about 60 seconds. But one of the things that you'll notice is that the console will erase itself as you go from one page to another. You can actually tell Chrome to keep those messages in there as you navigate. And that could be very useful, especially if you're doing something where you have a form and you're posting from one URL to another, or even the same URL but doing a full page reload. So I'll just close that there. So let's talk, and I just showed this actually. So in terms of what we care about, and again, I will repeat that there's a heck of a lot more that I'm not talking about. We care about, or I care about, the console, network tab, elements, sources, and resources. But again, there's a lot more, and depending on how much time I have, I may try to click around and just show you a few additional things in here. And I will point out that in terms of the other browsers, there's definitely some consistency here. So you will see console in Firefox and Safari and IE. You'll see network and elements and I think resources sometimes as well. So you will definitely see similar tabs and similar functionality amongst the different browsers. So in terms of the console, this is where errors show up, and we actually go back real quick. Remember, this is the page where I showed the extension, and that is the error. So, if I am on a large monitor and I have my console open, then I would not need that extension. I would see it immediately. You can also run commands here as well, and this is pretty useful. So, if the client said, when I click the button, it's not doing whatever, and you know that, okay, when the button is clicked, I run function foo. Well, the console is actually interactive. So if I go in here, I can actually run foo. Now, foo is not defined, but it would actually execute it. So I can, see if it's working. And you actually have complete code in here. So if foo did exist, when I typed F, it would have suggested it. And you could see it's recommending stuff, even the error that I just created. And you can also view log messages here, and this is the thing I want to talk about. So there's a console API where your code can send a message to the console. So if you've ever done like alert X to see what X is, yeah, don't use that anymore. That's really, really bad, especially since the alert statement stops everything on the page. I use the I use the heck out of this. So I'm going to talk a bit about the debugger in a few minutes. And, as a proper programmer, you have a comp sci degree, blah, blah, blah. We know that debugger is the most powerful way to debug stuff. I'll be 100% honest and say I do debugging via logging like 99% of the time, mainly because I'm a very fast typist. I can type some quick, logging messages in, I could see them, and I'm just more productive that way. So the two commands I use the most are log and dir. There's actually a whole big bunch of them. There's even like a table command that will render stuff in a nice table. That link there goes to, as far as I know, the only official docs for the console API. It started off in the Firebug extension, but it's now baked into every browser. So quick examples. And again, this goes in your JavaScript code. End users will not see this unless they open up their DevTools, and that's something to keep in mind. Don't do sensitive data in there because it's very visible. And you can see different examples of just a string message, which is fine. Where I'm printing X. You can also just pass multiple messages to console.log, and it'll just print them all. And at least in Chrome, I haven't tested Firefox in a while, but if you send it a complex object, it will render it okay. It won't, break. So just between you and I, the more F-bombs you drop in your console messages, the quicker you will fix your code. I guarantee. It's like magic. So a quick example, and I'm going to run some code here, and then I will kind of show you what's going on. So I have an application here, and it's supposed to do simple mathematics, and I do it, and nothing at all is working. And so far the only error I have in here is that the fave icon is not working. So that's not really helpful. So I'm going to go into my code. And by the way, if you don't recognize this editor, this is Visual Studio Code. It's a free editor by Microsoft on all the platforms, and it's really, really, really nice. So this is some pretty simple jQuery here. This is nothing too complex. I have a document already, and I'm saying on button click, get some stuff, and then print it out. Okay, so not too crazy. So I tend to take baby steps. So I will add some messages here. Did this even freaking work? Remember, cursing helps. Save it, reload. And I definitely see that. So yeah, that's not the issue. So the next thing I would check to see is, well, how about my click function? So I'm not worried about tabbing here. Did the freaking click func work? Save it and reload and do and oh, boom. So at this point, I recognize that something has gone wrong. So in theory, you know, I can actually start working on figuring out what in the heck has gone wrong. So let's actually take a quick look at this, and hold on one second. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to go back to my selector here, some button. So this should match something in the DOM. So I'm going to point out, I'm going to go ahead and do this early, but one of the tabs that will help with this is elements. And this will actually show me everything in here. And if I want to, I can actually start looking around for some button. And again, I'm kind of cheating by going ahead here, but I want to show this while I'm working on it. So my button is right here, and I could see right away that it is actually sim button. And one more trick, I can actually try my broken selector and see that it did not find anything, and then try a fixed one and see that it actually did match something. So if I come in here now and I fix the issue, it's going to be perfect, I guarantee. And let's see, all right, 7 plus 7 equals, boom, it worked perfectly, except not really, but we'll worry about that a little bit later. So one more example, console.dir, it's really meant for a complex object. Like I said, Chrome actually doesn't mind if you console.log a complex object, and probably Firefox won't mind as well. It's really good for figuring out the API for stuff. So if you know that you need to do something on the window object, you can actually dump the entire window object. So as an example of that, I'll just console.dir window, and I get, excuse me, the window object and all of the various parts, and it's pretty freaking huge. And by the way, if I had just done like window, I get that as well. Like I said, I think Firefox does it a bit nicer. Let's just go to localhost, presentations, doesn't matter which one. And we will just console.dir window. Yeah, I like how they have like a little like inline frame there that shows the entire thing, and I just think it's nice. By the way, while I'm in Firefox, I'll point out this little feature here is called the developer toolbar, and it actually is showing me that there is an issue. And notice it's really nice and small. And if you've never seen this before, you have a CLI in Firefox that allows you to work with web pages, and that may be a little bit too small to see on the screen there, but if you're in Firefox, just open up the dev toolbar and type help. But there's all kind of really freaking cool things in there, including the ability to take a screenshot of the web page, and you can even tell to take a screenshot of the full page. So it would do this top part and the bottom part as well. Like I said, that's just like one small example of the cool stuff that Firefox is doing. So the other tab that I spend a lot of time in is the network request panel, and there's multiple reasons. So number one, this lets me check the output. So if I'm calling some API and it's not like really showing up, then I can look at the output and kind of figure out what's going wrong. I could also look for things like just redirects or just errors like 404, for example. This is also a good way to look at performance. Now, in terms of performance, I will point out that Chrome has incredibly deep performance tuning stuff, super deep. I'm not really going to talk a lot about that, mainly because I haven't used it that much yet. My performance testing really has been in the network area. So I will use this tab to look for things like super large images, or maybe I'm calling an API that I assume is like real small JSON, but it could be like 500K of JSON. So I'll use it for things like too much data being sent back and forth, or something being very slow to respond. Just want to point out that there are deeper performance things like checking the memory usage, looking for thrashing in terms of UI rendering and all that. That would be like an 8-hour presentation just on performance. So just kind of keep in mind that there are some incredibly deep technical tools just for performance in terms of like really complex apps. I'll point out JSONP is done a little bit different in terms of how you view the network request, and you will see an example of that in right now. All right, so what I am going to do, and give me 1 second while I check my notes here real quick. All right, so we're going to go to demo 3 and start looking at some examples. So I have this application. This is kind of similar to what you've seen before, but what I've decided is that obviously math is too hard for JavaScript. So I'm going to call a server to do the mathematics for me. And this is the code right here. And just doing a simple jQuery get on a JSON file. So nothing too complex. So I'll do my numbers and hit the button, and bam. So in the console, I see the issue right away. It's a 404, but in the network panel, I can see as well that the error showed up. And by the way, there's a heck of a lot of filtering. I'll turn it off so you can see everything. You see the JavaScript, the CSS. I can actually filter by file name, so I can see what are my Bootstrap related files. I can look at just the JavaScript loading stuff. Let me clear that out. And you can see jQuery, and I will point out extensions sometimes mess with this area. So these are actually from extensions, not the current file. One really kind of cool trick on this, and actually let me try that again. Sweet. So never mind, I was going to show something, but I'm going to wait on that. You can do things like disable the cache. You can also tweak your speed. So if you want to feel like really bad, go to your website, enable these dev tools, and set it to something like regular 2G, which is probably a good deal of other parts of the world, and just see how slow your website loads. It could be pretty depressing to see how someone on a mobile device could be loading your page. I'll also point out that there's also mobile size emulation, and you actually see how your application would render on a variety of different sizes, and you can do different devices, and you can actually edit these. So if the iPhone 7 comes out and it has some weird size like 7 inches or whatever, you can actually create a definition for the iPhone 7 and test it. But we will turn that off. So that issue is easy to fix, right? It was just a 404. We could see that under the XHR. So let's fix that. And I fix it in the next file. And, excuse me, we'll load that again, and it's not working. So we go into console, and it's okay, and network is all right. We have the data, it came back, but what went wrong? We'll go to the code, and we'll look at what's going on, and I can see that I'm calling foo on JSON, and I'm taking the result and I'm rendering it in the DOM as is. So I did this because the developer who built this API, they told me that the result would be just the value, right? And I trusted the developer because they're never wrong. But when I go in DevTools and actually look at this, I can see, oh, it's actually a complex object. It's a JSON object where my value is a key called result. So to fix that, I would need to do a JSON parse on it, or tell jQuery it's JSON, and then work with the result key. All right. That's easy enough to fix. So if we look at test 3, you can see I am saying to use dot result. And actually jQuery is smart enough to recognize the JSON and just parse it for me. So this will fix it all, right? This is going to be perfect. So we'll just load it up and test again, and it's still broken. I fixed everything, right? So I look at the response, and yeah, it's still right. Result is 99. So what in the heck is going wrong? I'm going to pause here for just 5 or so seconds, or just kind of ramble a little bit, and tell me. You can't tell me, but try to figure out what it is before I say it. It may be a bit hard to see, so I'm going to go back to the second demo and just load it up real quick. And you see, yeah, it's the same. Response 1. Let's go back to 3. Load it again. What's going on? Maybe you notice that the line numbers are going down. They weren't before, so that's odd. So yeah, let me scroll down, and oh, look at that. So if you're working with an app server, ColdFusion, PHP, Node.js, whatever, one kind of common thing is, hey, we need every page on our site to have a footer. So we'll just put code in like some central file to say, hey, when you're done, I'll put this footer. Well, if you do it to every request for your app server, including your APIs, then this is what you can end up with. And by the way, yes, I have run into this into the wild, and it was a fun thing to discover. Oh, so one more example. So JSONP, I want to point out that when I was debugging this, I was using the XHR tab. That's where Ajax things go. JSONP is actually not XHR. I'll just show a random code pin that I forked from someone, and that is doing a JSONP example. So it's kind of doing it by hand. Let me see if it's going to work. Open up DevTools. And if this demo is not working, then I'm not going to stick around for it too long because it was working yesterday. There we go. It is under, boom. Okay, so when you do a JSONP, it's actually a hack that is appending a script tag to your DOM. Libraries like jQuery will do all this for you behind the scenes. It almost feels like you're doing XHR, but you're not. So in this case, we're loading something from a Yahoo API, and it's actually going to be under the JS tab, not the XHR. And CodePin's a bit weird on that, but it's under the JSON tab, and you can actually see the JSONP response there. So I just point that out because the first time I tried to debug a JSONP using application, and I was looking in the XHR tab, it took me forever to figure out that, oh, it's not XHR, it's actually a JS request instead. Pardon me, I'm in Louisiana, and we have spring already, which means allergies. So elements, I've actually talked a bit about this already. It's a handy way to look at your DOM, and I actually ignored this dev tool for a long time because, I thought, well, my issues are not the HTML stuff. That's all static. But it didn't really occur to me that if I'm doing an app server, my HTML could actually be pretty dynamic. So Node.js could be outputting random HTML tags that could have different issues in them. Looking at the elements panel will make that a bit more obvious. And you can also use JavaScript actually to output random, excuse me, random HTML as well that could be broken. And again, looking at elements will help you find it. So I'm going to show an example of this. And I apologize again for all the stuff in my sciences. So This is actually a fake example of the Twitter API. This is back when they had a simple API. It's when I first built this demo, but since that's gone, I'm now using something nice and simple, a fake JSON file. So this is supposed to represent a list of tweets that match to that search. And it's supposed to be where every other tweet has a gray background. And instead, what you're seeing is a result and a gray background. So this is obviously not good. So I can look at the elements to start to dig in here to find out what's going wrong. So there's actually multiple ways to go here. I can actually dig down here. You can see it's kind of highlighting as I go over. I can also right-click and do inspect, and that will drill down to the unit. And as I look at it, I can begin to see stuff. I see that I have all these empty paragraph tags, and that really makes no sense. Where are these empty paragraph tags coming from? And this is a fascinating bug here. If we look at the code, what we'll see is, this is the result of me calling the API, which again is fake. And for each result, I'm adding a paragraph. And what I did is I used invalid HTML. My closing thing there is pointing the wrong direction. Well, I talked earlier about how browsers really work hard to fix your broken crap. This is a great example. The browser saw, and I'm just going to type in the code here, it saw p stuff this. I'm sorry, this. And it took this and it actually said, oh, I think you mean something like this instead. So it kind of fixed it, but made it bad. So if I go in here, I fix the HTML, I can go back and reload and do like a search, and again, it's just fake, and it comes out nice. So by the way, the elements in here are all live. So if I want to, I can come in here and I can start modifying stuff like project name. I could change this to foobar blarg, and it's actually live. And this is kind of cool where, like, if you have a header that's maybe a bit too long and you want to test just a different header, you can actually live edit and see how things look without having to edit the code and go back. Another kind of cool trick here, you can actually go into your DOM, and here's my first result. You can actually take one and hit delete and just kill it, or actually take one and move it around in the DOM. Now, obviously, this is not saving to the file system, but if you wanted to tweak things by just switching the order of things and seeing how things look, then you could. So for example, if I wanted to see how this button would look in front of it, and I say that, let's see if it works. And no, but you do have some abilities to switch things around. It's very cool. You can also do a search against the DOM as well. But again, this is one of those tools that I ignored for a while, and I wish that I had not, because it ended up actually being really darn useful. All right, so the next one is your sources tab, and this is your debugger. Now, like I said earlier, if you're a proper programmer, this is your power tool for doing so. I will say that, but again, I'll be honest, I rarely use it because typically I can see what's wrong pretty quickly with some log messages and even just seeing the errors in the console. So just some quick key terms. If you've never heard of a debugger, this will actually allow you to pause the browser. So typically when a browser loads and when code runs, it runs immediately. It goes, it doesn't stop. The cool thing about a debugger is that you can use what's called a breakpoint to say, I want you to pause when this happens so that I can go into the code and start fiddling around and seeing stuff. So I can add specifically a breakpoint. So I can say, hey, this line is where I want things to stop. I can also do dynamic breakpoints. So if I have a loop, for example, where things break, but only at like halfway through, I can actually create a breakpoint in a loop, but only when, let's say, x is greater than 10. You can also do things like, for example, when the DOM changes, when there's an XHR or a particular event, I want you to do a breakpoint at that. The other key point for this is stepping, basically what to do when you stops. So you have a variety of different ways of kind of stepping over. So if you're about to, like, let's say you're paused and you're about to call another function, you can actually step into that function and still, execute JavaScript line one by one. Or you could say, run that function, but don't pause, but pause when you come back. What you use will depend on, how you want to debug. So that was a lot. Let's look at some examples here. And we will go in. Okay, so I have my code here, and I could see the file here, and I could see my code is still broken. But what I want to do here is I want to tell the browser to pause, and I'm going to do that by clicking in the gutter. And you can see I have a breakpoint that showed up over here as well, and I can move that over. So now when I try it again, boom, it paused. So I can actually begin to see stuff. First, I can see actual variables in the code area, which is pretty darn cool. I can also see it over here as well. All right. So I'm just gonna step and run the next line, and notice right away, I think I see what my problem is. I'm doing math, right? I'm adding, the first number plus the second number, but notice the string here, or the quoted values. JavaScript is treating the value from the field as a string. When you add two strings together, it simply concatenates them together and makes it one more string. So if I just say resume, I could see the issue, okay? By the way, notice how Chrome is saying, hey, you're working locally. I can actually set up a workspace and begin to edit code in here, such that when I try to fix something, I don't have to leave my browser. That's a very cool feature. Honestly, I don't use it. I like my editor. I like having things separate. That's just the way that I do things. But just keep in mind that if the idea of editing code inside here makes you happy, then you can do that as well. So real quick, I'm going to show another example of this fixed. No, actually, I'm sorry. Let me do one thing real quick. I'm going to go ahead and fix this. And there's a couple of different ways. I'm just going to say number, like so. Save it. Oops, I lost my semicolon. So now if I reload, notice I still have the breakpoint. I'll do 7 plus 7. It still pauses. The values here, it's definitely not a string anymore, so I'll just resume because I think things are copacetic, and they are. One more kind of really cool demo, and when I first saw this kind of blew me away. So I have a little file here. I'm gonna go in the console, and what this is doing is using the set timeout function to print something to the console. And if I actually go into my sources, I can actually see the code. And there it is, right? So there's a console message. I can actually modify this. Hit save. I get a warning that the file has changed, but it's not on the file system. So Chrome is just being helpful. But I literally changed live JavaScript code while it was running. And that just kind of blows me away. If you do use this as a feature, you can actually look at your changes, and it doesn't really render this too well because it was a real small text change. But if I add like y equals 1 and save it, I could see a more verbose change here. I can actually roll back as well, which is really kind of freaking cool. So another one I want to point out, another really useful tab, is your resources. If you do anything at all with local storage, IndexedDB, Web SQL, App Cache, cookies, etc. You can see them in the Resources tab. Now, I will go to mine. Let me open it up. And what you will see is that there's nothing highlighted here for Web SQL and IndexedDB. That is because I'm not using it on this domain. If I was, then it would be something that I could expand and look at. I do have some local storage values. I can go in here and I can actually modify them live and actually erase them as well. But I could kind of play around with this as well. If you're doing Web SQL, you can actually run SQL commands, which is pretty cool. For IndexedDB, you can look at the schema, look at the object stores, and see them there. You'll also see service workers, which is a really, really new feature. Cache storage as well, and app cache is the older one. And if you're curious, you can look at your cookies as well. By the way, this just kind of points out that anything you do on client-side storage is not secure because people can go in here and view the values and modify them. There was a pretty cool multiplayer game, a web game that came out a few years ago. That was like a little mini RPG, and all the data was stored in local storage. So I went in, I modified my HP to be like 1,000,000, and I kicked butt. So in terms of mobile web, you have what's called remote debugging. And that's where you can use Chrome actually to debug your Android device, or use Safari to debug your iOS device. Now, I'm going to show iOS just because I have a iPhone, and I will fire up Safari just for that. So if I go under Develop, I could see I have my iPhone, and I don't have a test yet. So I'll open up Safari and come back. And what you're seeing here is that I have my blog open on my device. So you can't see my device now. I can actually share it, but I won't do it because I've been talking for a long time. But this is DevTools, and this is Safari's DevTools, actually on my mobile device. So when I do alert 1, this actually opened an alert statement on my device. So I can go in here and see local storage, which I have none for my blog. I thought I did. I have cookies. And do debugging, look at the network stuff and all that. And essentially, I can use the powerful desktop debugging tools for my mobile device. So there's docs for both of these, and I have links to tell you how to do this. If you're doing anything with mobile web, if you're doing anything with Apache Cordova or PhoneGap, then you definitely want to use these. I will also point out Gap Debug, which you can find at Genutech. This actually gives you the DevTools just in Chrome. So you can have one tab in Chrome, and you can remote debug both Android and iOS devices all from one interface, which is really handy. I love these guys. This is a great free tool. So in terms of other browsers, I have been really raving about Firefox, even though I just kind of barely showed you. That little dev tool is, I think, the coolest thing ever. Firefox is also doing some really cool stuff with animations. I don't do anything at all with CSS-based animations. But if you do, Firefox has incredible tools for working with it. Chrome does as well, but I think Firefox has the edge on that. Safari, again, I pretty much only use it when I'm debugging Cordova/PhoneGap apps, and because I do that a lot, I open it up a lot just for that. And again, if you're one of those people who still avoid IE because of IE6, you need to get over it. IE11 is a good browser, and Edge is a really good browser. Like if I was primarily a Windows person now, I would definitely consider using Edge over Chrome. It's a really, really nice browser. So in terms of where to go next, you definitely want to check out Chrome extensions and Firefox add-ons as well, because at least for Chrome, I'm not sure about Firefox, but for Chrome, the debugger itself can be extended. So for example, there is a Angular debugger extension for Chrome. So it puts essentially Angular stuff down here, which is pretty cool. So check the Chrome Web Store. I don't know if Firefox allows you to modify the dev tools yet, but there are definitely Firefox add-ons that will help with debugging in general. And as a general reminder, the Mozilla Developer Network is not a Firefox-only documentation site. It is a web standard site, and it is the best site. So if you're tired of ending up on W3 schools when you Google for, select or whatever, in Google, if you prefix your search MDN space, then you will always end up on the Moz Dev Network. So there are more docs on Chrome DevTools. Again, I could spend 8 hours just on the performance stuff, but there's a link there for the docs to dig deeper. At the end, never accept not knowing where the bug is. I've been programming for 20 years now, and in a huge majority of the time, by the time I just find the bug, I am like 95% of the way there. Because as soon as I can find what the bug is, I just Google for it, and I end up on Stack Overflow, and I see a solution. But for me, it's been incredibly useful to know how to find that bug. If you've been on my blog, then you know. If you ask me like, hey, it's not working, and a comment, the first thing that I say is, what do your dev tools tell you? Because you need to know what they are and need to know how to find them. So with that, what I'm going to do is I'm going to stop the screen share, and I'm going to see if there's any questions. I will remind you, my blog is raymondcamden.com. You can email me there. I have a contact form. If you can't get through to me today, then definitely drop me a line. I like to help people. I like to answer questions, and just let me know. So with that, I have to actually find the darn screen share. There we go. Stop sharing. And find where my face is. There's my face. Oh, sorry to scare you. And the QA pod should be over here. And I see nothing, which is great. That means nobody had any questions. So I'm going to specifically ask Daniel if you have any questions. And Daniel, I see your chat window very clearly. So if you want to skip the QA pod, I will repeat the question for those who are not in Daniel's group or are watching the recording. I will repeat them. So feel free, Daniel, to type it in. If you have nothing, then I'll say good night. But and by the way, for those of you worrying about the pause, the live stream is a good 30 seconds or so behind me talking. So I'm just going to give Daniel another few seconds here. By the way, if you're hanging up now, if you're stopping, those of you who are not in this group, thank you very much for listening. I hope this was helpful. I will take some more tea from my giant Superman cup. So I'm not hearing from Daniel, so now I'm a bit worried that they may be more behind than I anticipated. So I just asked him directly if he has any questions. What do you recommend for prototyping, JS Fiddle, etc.? That's a good question. So I don't do a lot of generic prototyping. I'm just like layout in general. The only times I've done that are with Ionic applications. I love the Ionic framework, and Ionic has Ionic Creator, which is a visual drag and drop tool. And I will definitely use Ionic Creator. I strongly recommend it. But outside of hybrid mobile apps, I haven't done prototyping in forever. You mentioned JS Fiddle as well. Typically, people use that to test JavaScript. Because I always have a local web server, I just open a file and just write it. So that's why I have a folder called Testing Zone that has like 30,000 files in it, because I never know what's saved to erase. So I will just do it in my browser. I've not been a big fan of JS Fiddle and CodePen and all that, just because I have my own local server to test stuff. And to be clear, those are very, very cool services. They've just not been something that I have used in my own development. In terms of, so the next question is about performance, how to debug. I can point you to some presentations on performance. Like I said, it's a very kind of gnarly topic. What I'm going to do is tomorrow, when on my blog, I'll post this YouTube video, and I'll post multiple links from this presentation, and I will put it on my to-do to point out some good performance-related ones as well. At minimum, I'll at least tell you exactly where it is in the Chrome DevTools docs. If that makes sense. Yeah, so Daniel is asking a follow-up about, how do you show people examples? And so, yeah, so that is definitely where JSBin and JS Fiddle will help with that. Again, I don't typically do that. Normally, someone is sharing code with me, and not to imply that I write perfect code. No, I definitely don't. But for me, I'm not often doing that. I would actually like it if people would use JSBin and JS Fiddle to share stuff with me. And that actually brings up a good point. So if you use JSBin or JS Fiddle, typically you have to like copy and paste your code over. And one of the best ways to find out to find your bug is to get rid of all the other crap. So if I have a application that has like 4 tabs doing stuff, like a big Angular JS application, that could be a huge app. So if you literally do a JS bin for just the one part that's broken, as you actually do that, you may find the bug. Like, oh, I was making this thing up just to show you, and I found the issue. So I recommend simplification for creating a reproducible bug case. And I'm seeing some typing on my side here from Daniel, so some more questions, I assume. And Daniel is saying, everything that I've showed so far will work really well with the ColdFusion stuff. He knows I'm more mobile JS based. Yeah, by the way, all that network stuff would work with ColdFusion, PHP, Node, Perl CGI scripts, if you're still doing that. Cool. I'm just waiting to see if Daniel has anything else. By the way, I wish my screen wasn't so big. I would turn it around to show my Star Wars collection. So remote. The question is, given a remote source, how to detect a firewall block? So you should definitely see an error in the network panel. It should be a status code. I can't tell you the status code off the top of my head. Definitely not 404. Definitely not 500, because that's a server-side error. But there should be some form of error. I've also seen firewalls kind of like not like stop the thing, but just kind of like let it hang on forever. And you would see in the network panel, you would see the code initiating it, and you would see it never end. Now, would you be able to tell that that's a firewall? Maybe not. I can say that if it is stopped and the firewall put any type of header message or anything like that, you do have access not only to just like the raw response, like the JSON or whatever, you have all the headers too. So if some funky header was sent back, then you could use it. I'll also recommend Charles is a network monitor, and I have used that when I've had really, really wonky, weird web stuff. I used it more when it was the only way to really pick up on Flash Swift network calls. I don't really see Flash a lot anymore, so I use Charles less. But when I have run into things where the browser dev tools weren't telling me enough, Charles worked very good as well. I used to also use a tool called Service Capture, but I haven't used that for a while. And Charles is like, I think, $50 or something, and so it's pretty cheap. By the way, highly recommend the Surface. It's a really good device. I used a Surface Book 2 weeks or so ago at a conference in California, and that's a darn nice piece of machinery. Like, I was seriously jealous of that. Okay, so Daniel's side is done. And again, on the YouTube recording, I'll have links and all that. Thank you, Daniel. Thank you to your entire group. Again, very, very thankful that you're able to accommodate me moving. And I hope this was useful. And I will see you on the flip side. Good night.